Hello everyone, welcome to IMPRINT IS. I'm Varun Khalar, and we're looking at the 2nd of January 2019 from the Indian Express and the Hindu, right? So let's look at what has happened yesterday. Kader Khan, the famous Bollywood writer, actor, he has died in Canada, and he was very, very famous for delivering hits in the 90s. If you're in your childhood, you might remember him. Then Prime Minister Modi gave an interview. We'll talk about that, right, to ANI. There are three newly renamed islands in Andaman Nicobar, and these are named after Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, right? And we're going to look into that, and there's going to be an objective type question there. Then there was a case of a blood transfusion, right? And how that happened, right? HIV positive blood were transfused in pregnant women, so that is a big problem. Then the foreign policy challenges, the two articles. One is in the Indian Express Explained page, the foreign policy challenge, and the other is in the Indian the Hindu, right? And this talks about India-Bangladesh ties. Then we have a short editorial, which is a continuation of yesterday's discussion on the NPA improvement, right? But it does talk about the fact that the private sector banks are doing much better in the NPA handling that rather than the PSUs. Then articles on the Mudra Bank, how it leading in the Mudra loan is leading to NPAs. There is a reduction of tax, duties, tariffs on palm oil from Asian countries. Israel and USA have left the UNESCO, so that again can become an objective question for prelim. So again, I think these three areas specifically, right? There can be a question on HIV, right? And we'll try a question there. There can be a question here, and there can be a question on UNESCO. So let's move ahead. Okay, so this is Mr. Kader Khan, and he's very, very famous, right? And he was a fixture almost in all the successful movies of the 80s and the 90s. He was a dialogue writer, he was an actor. In several movies, he used to be credited with both. And he was sought of by Prakash Mehra and Manmohan Desai to be the writer of his movies. And he had written a lot of movies. I think most of you would have seen Amar Akbar Anthony and Mukandar Ka Sikandar, right? So he was an amazing, amazing person. And he died recently. Yesterday, so obviously, I think I think you should know about him as well. Right, this is Kader Khan with Aditya Pancholi, right? Kader Khan, Anil Kapoor, Mithun Chakrabarti, etc. And then remember Dule Raja, in case you have seen that. That's one of the most funniest movies that I can remember from my childhood. But let's go to more serious stuff. And here is Prime Minister Modi, and he has talked about a few topics. Let's look at the triple talaq. So in the triple talaq, he says that most Islamic countries have banned triple talaq. So it is not a matter of religion or faith; it's a matter of tradition, right? And on the other hand, the Sabrimala case, is related to tradition, and triple talaq is an issue of gender equality. So he says even in Pakistan, triple talaq is banned, so it can't be an issue of tradition, right? It's an issue of gender equality and social justice, right? And he further says that there are some temples where men can't go. There are certain temples where women can't go, and that is a part of tradition. So that is something that and he also mentions Indu Malhotra's reply to that. Then Urjit Patel, right? He says in that case, Urjit Patel was not made to leave, right? So he's saying that it was not because of him, right? In the CBI thing also, right? He has talked about the fact that both were sent on leave. The CBI director Alok Verma and deputy, right, Rakesh Asthana went to leave legally, right? Because institution is paramount to us, right? So that's what he's talked about. Then he is talking about the fact that it's going to be a public versus coalition. He has talked about the fact that, right, on the Rafale deal, he said those leveling allegations against him were actually weakening the security forces, and he would continue to expedite the defense procurement process, right? And he says. When the Congress is accusing him for favoring Anil Ambani, he says it's not allegation against me personally, but an allegation against my government. And if there's allegation against me personally, then basically let them tell them who actually gave the allegation and all. Then obviously he also has talked about surgical strikes, and he says that he will support right the army to take. And he also mentions the fact that he had told all the Jawans to come back by morning who had gone for the surgical strikes. So very interesting. Interestingly, he has chosen ANI, right? And we had very funny interviews previously taken by Arnab Goswami, in which he was asking such nice questions that it felt as if it was a cheerleading squad talking to their leader rather than an interview. Okay. The next is, the India has renamed 3 islands in Andaman Nicobar. So we have Ross Island here, right? Right, and Havelock Island and Neil Island. Okay, so Ross Island was once a settlement where British established a penal colony and later built 2 barracks. It was abandoned following a massive earthquake and World War II. Then it has been named as the Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Dweep. And then Havelock Island, which is very, very famous. It has white sand beaches, rich coral reefs, lush green rainforest, right? So here, Havelock Island, basically, actually anybody who has gone to the Andamans for a holiday has gone there, right? So this has been named as Swaraj Deep. And then Neil Island is a miniature version of Havelock Island, and Shahid Dweep, it is very close to that. Right, its beaches are known, named after characters from the Ramayana, Sitapur, Ramnagar, Lakhanpur, and the beaches are wonderful, right? So again, so I think you should remember this. So Ross, Havelock, at Neil, right? So something like right, R, H, and N, right? And obviously NSS. That is how I would try to remember them. But just Havelock is Swaraj and Neil is Shahid. So that is something I would really want you to remember. So just to have a question, objective type question. So Ross Island, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Dweep. Yeah, this is correct. We have to match the following. Neil Island is Shahid Dweep and Havelock Island is Swaraj Deep. So obviously the answer is one only here. So this is a practice question for you guys, right? Okay, the next is editorial by Harsh Mandar and Abdul Kalam Azad, right? And he's a human rights worker who has written a book called Partitions of the Heart, The Unmaking the Idea of India. And Azad is also a human rights researcher based in Assam. So he's talking about the NRC, and let's give it a reading. He says, when the sun went down on 2018, the doors closed for 1 million residents of Assam who were unable to file their claims to prove they were Indian citizens. The claims of 3 million who were left out of the NRC will now be examined by a foreigners tribunal. Assam, obviously, meanwhile, will continue to battle the throes of an uncertain tolerance. And through a complex and torturous process with no parallels in any other part of the country and few in the world, millions of Assamese residents were called upon to produce documents that they were Indian citizens. And it is not often remembered that not only Punjab and Bengal, but also Assam was partitioned in 1947, when after a referendum, Sylhet district was transferred from Assam to Pakistan, right? And migration of Sylhet and other parts of Bengal to Assam had continued, until then for 2 centuries, fueled by land hunger, etc., etc. So, and then finally, what happened with the cataclysms of partition and the Bangladesh Liberation War, there were fresh migrations. And from the late 1970s, sporadically violent movement, right, against the foreigners, right, who saw themselves as original inhabitants, rocked the state. And the current updating of the NRC is the fulfillment of the agreement reached by the agitators with the Union government that the persons who migrated after 1971 would be identified and deported. Now, interestingly, we have the Supreme Court judgment, and it says that it is not the duty of the state agencies which charge a person with being a foreigner to prove that their claim. Instead, it was those who claimed citizenship to prove that they were citizens. And this actually has turned its head on natural law, that a person is innocent until proven guilty. And resultingly, impoverished and often unlettered people were required to garner official documents such as of birth, land ownership, and voters lists to establish their citizenship credential. And remember, majority of the indigenous people, right, in rural areas were unable to prove their citizenship because birth certificates are rare, and many did not attend school or migrate, and they migrated for work or married their children. Remember, land records are very poorly maintained, and many cases landless and unrecorded tenants or unroaches on common lands are also there. Right. So obviously, the underlying chauvinism of the process is exposed by the official orders, again ratified by the Supreme Court, which exempted persons who are original inhabitants of the state of Assam from any other further proofs for automatic inclusion in NRC. And the original inhabitant is nowhere defined, but in practice, original inhabitants are those are taken to exclude people who speak Bengali, Nepali, Hindi, or Santhali, even if they have lived in Assam for generations. So basically, language has been related to citizenship here, and which is very interesting, considering that was rejected by our founding fathers. Then the Labyrinth NRC Authority is not the only agency empowered to identify non-citizens in Assam. In fact, there are three parallel processes, mostly depending on low-level bureaucratic and police discretion, and run side by side in what poet Manash Bhattacharya aptly describes as the sniffer dog idea of the state, hunting down foreigners. And this sniffer dog process actually began in 1997 on the pretext of extensive revision of electoral rolls. And the Election Commission, without any due process, marked 3.7 lakh voters as doubtful, and these were stripped of their voting rights. Their cases were referred to foreigners tribunal, and the election officials continued to doubt the persons who regard to be doubtful. Then the Assam Police Border Organization deputes police officials in many police stations who identify people they regard to be possibly non-citizens and refer the cases to the foreigners tribunal. So people who don't speak Assamese and are not from indigenous tribes are in a way belated from all sides. They do not know when challenges to their citizenship may come from the NRC executives, the election officials, or the local police person. And in 2006, the police, border organization referred Ajabar Ali, a small farmer, right, to the foreigners tribunal. When he answered the summons from tribunal, he learned that the tribunal, in an ex parte judgment, had already declared him a foreigner. He was whisked away from, tribunal directly to a detention center inside a jail. His wife Balijan Bibi sold their cell phone, cattle, and farmland to pay a lawyer to challenge the order to get her husband released from detention. And obviously, the son went to Guwahati High Court to hear the judgment while his mother waited anxiously. And basically, he was informed that the court has rejected their plea. And after a while, he found her hanging from the ceiling. Right. So obviously, what is happening is that all this is leading to suicides of people who had lost hope of proving they're citizens of this country and had found no reasons. And this is a collective tragedy of millions of religious, linguistic, and ethnic minorities of Assam. Right. And obviously, no light is visible because union and state government are silent about the fate of what will happen to those who are declared foreigners. Thousands are housed indefinitely in hellish detention centers in flagrant violation of constitutional guarantees and international law. And tomorrow, these numbers could turn into millions, but where they would be detained, how can you detain 10 lakh people? And Indian government is not even negotiating an extradition treaty for the return of these people to Bangladesh. And if they continue to live in India and non-citizens, are we not actually manufacturing a Rohingya-like situation without any idea, forcing people to live without rights or security? So definitely some kind of decision has to be made about this. Will they be extradited? Will there be a treaty? And further, even if they're foreigners, they have been living here for so long that I think they should be given citizenship in some ways. Right, and this kind of exercise, the NRC exercise, is actually in bad taste, and definitely, I would say that something that we should definitely avoid in any country. Okay, here we have something very interesting. In December last year, a pregnant woman was transfused with blood from a donor who was HIV positive and helped. And actually also had hepatitis B. And the transfusion took place in a state government hospital in Sattur of Virudhunagar district in Tamil Nadu. And they had actually sourced the blood from a laboratory run by a private agency in Shivakasi of the same district. Right, and preliminary investigations, show that the lab had failed to detect the donor's blood was HIV positive. And this was obviously followed by similar scare when a woman in Chennai claimed that she too have been infected by HIV following a transfusion in the government medical college. Right. So Obviously, the first question is how does it happen? What is the standard procedure? So the standard procedure, so besides proving the donor's medical health and current health, the standard procedure is to screen for 5 diseases: hepatitis B, C, syphilis, malaria, and HIV before blood is collected. Blood testing equipment, being used across Tamil Nadu is being procured by NACO from vendors who follow WHO standards, and they are supposed to be the best in standards and results, and therefore obviously something has to be looked. Further, NACO has an external, quality assessment scheme which conducts annual refresher programs and tie up with experts from Safe Haven Law, besides doing random sampling from laboratories, and this is being held at 89 government and 196 and private blood banks in Tamil Nadu where 8 lakh people donate blood annually. So obviously this is doing well. So obviously how it has gone wrong. Obviously department suggests it's a human error, right? And they're wrongly labeled it, right? And obviously it's not because of qualified personnel, because the lab technician who who wrote the report actually was qualified. So obviously this is something very, very sad, and obviously there's a risk to a baby, right? So the women, obviously Raj of TNS access, hopefully that the baby will not get the infection, as the mother received ART within a few days of getting the transfusion with the infected part. And ART is essentially meant to minimize the viral load in the body, and he says we have to be careful during the delivery too, and you have to avoid any injury on the baby's skin during the process. Further, the baby will also be given nevirapine, a syrup, antiviral drug within the first 6 to 12 weeks. Right. So obviously, but on the other hand, the senior professor says that hepatitis B, which is also there in the blood, poses a bigger risk to women's life, right? And HIV can be controlled, a normal life can be ensured with the support of the medication these days. Okay, so there we have this question, right? Please pause the video and try this question, right? And okay, so I think here, obviously, we definitely know from this article that an infected mother can transmit. That's true, right? And obviously, a risk of infection is higher by blood transfusion than by exposure to contaminated. That's also fine, right? And obviously, chances also are higher if you suffer from other sexual transmitted disease. This thing is written reverse, so chances of transmission from male to female are twice as likely from female to male. So this is the answer. This is incorrect. Okay, so let's look at the next article. This is foreign policy challenge. So now the question is, very interestingly, what has happened is we have polls this year. So we have gone, you should remember, India's polity has gone into election mode this year. And the answer to all questions is election ke baad. But the world has not stopped where India treads water. And for Indian foreign policy, we have to keep change with the rapid challenges, which would be everywhere, amid the political fluidity home. And the big picture is also understanding China and managing relationship with them, then keeping Pakistan happy, relationship with Donald Trump, and relationship with neighbors and with Taliban. So let's look at what this article is saying. So India and China, right? Obviously, this is one of the major topics. So the Asian superpowers' economic and geostrategic ambitions will continue to reshape Indian response to almost every front, and with its relationship to US and Russia in the West, and ASEAN and Japan in the East. And despite the Wuhan meeting and the cooling off of tensions caused by the Doklam standoff, the inauguration of a people-to-people track during Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit, many differences are there. Right. So remember, how does India react with the US trade war against China? Right. That's one thing. Then now Shiv Shankar Menon, right, who was the NSF, right, has made a case for a new modus vivendi to replace the strategic framework formulated in 1988. Menon says that respect for each other's core interests should be there, right? So there should be new areas of cooperation like counterterrorism and maritime security and crisis management, a clearer understanding of each other's sensitivities, and at least setting or at least managing differences, and a strategic dialogue, right, about actions on the international stage. Because see, India and China do have very common interest in the areas of trade and in environment, right? Especially in WTO and in the COPs. So there we have common interest. Obviously we should talk about what are the sensitivities we have towards our border things. Okay, India and Pakistan, right? So obviously Kartarpur initiative, right? Or the release of prisoners on either sides, right, could be leveraged for a wider agreement. Remember, we still have the elephant in the room. The Kashmir issue is still there. So obviously the Gurdwara will not change too much, right? The Punjab government, right, the state government has talked about the fact that, right, though we have actually opened and agreed to the Kartarpur Gurdwara, it might be an plot to revive secession in Punjab, right? So that is so obviously there will be more gestures during this year, but I think after elections this year, I think we'll get a much more clearer picture. Further, we have a huge problem in CPEC, right? And that's also something that India needs to take care of. Then India and the Taliban. So obviously, New Delhi's claim that Pakistan has been isolated in the international community has not been borne out of by the key role played by the Pakistan army in the push for a deal with Taliban in Afghanistan, right? And President Trump may have made it plain on Twitter what he thinks of Pakistan, but he's apparently sent a more polite message requesting Prime Minister Imran Khan for Pakistan cooperation further in talks with Taliban, right? And this is something that we need. Remember, see, US plans to withdraw 7,000 troops from Afghanistan, close on the heels from the pullout in Syria, right? And once that happens, the Taliban obviously will come in and take power. So obviously, other people like Afghanistan, Iran, China, Russia, they all are stakeholders in this case. And what will happen is that there can even be a fallout to India as well in this case. So let's see what happens here. Then friendship with neighbors. Right, we'll talk about Bangladesh in detail. The Maldives and the Sri Lankans are again pro-Indian, so I think that's extremely good for us, right? And we also have given a line of credit, so that's also working. In Nepal, Prime Minister Narendra Modi actually visited a couple of times, right? If not more than that, and he basically, obviously still has not succeeded in reversing the damage done by the 2015 economic blockade in support of the Madhesis, right? And Bhutan, on the other hand, wants trade investment from India, where could provide employment, right? And obviously would take away the single dependence that the Bhutanese have on hydro exports to India, right? And remember, the major problem of the neighboring countries of India is the fact that we look at them from the prism of China, right? So we definitely need to be friends with this country. Then obviously India and Donald Trump and USA, and remember we have signed the COMCASA, right? And obviously to facilitate interoperability between the militaries and a sale of high-end technology. Remember, but we still have issues with Iran. We have still issues in the visa issues. We have issues, in exports. Remember, even our purchase of S-400 defense shield system from Russia could attract sanctions, and obviously that's one problem that I think. So obviously India-US relationship. So remember, the problem remains that India and US, despite the fact that we want to be close, right, we don't have a clear-cut relationship. Okay, then we have this article by Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti. He's a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, right? And he also has served as a High Commissioner to Bangladesh. So what has happened? So bilateral transformation, the article says, India and Bangladesh must seize the opportunity to further enhance connectivity and trade ties. So there has been a spectacular victory by the Awami League, and the incumbent president, Sheikh Hasina, has won, right? And what has happened is Bangladesh is growing really well, 7.6 in the last quarter. It is making it the fastest growing economy, right? Now, if you look at India-Bangladesh ties, India's neighborhood policy has focused on Bangladesh. And obviously, Bangladesh is very important for India's Act East policy, regional groupings such as BIMSTEC and SAARC, and the BBI initiative. So obviously, in futuristic ties, obviously, between India and Bangladesh are definitely very favorable. On the other hand, see, Bangladesh is India's largest trading partner in South Asia. We have a turnover of around 9 billion, right, and an investment of more than a billion a year. We have the largest porous border, 4,100, right? So obviously, Bangladesh obviously has helped India a lot of times. It has denied support to insurgent groups, and insurgent leaders of Ulfa were handed to India by Bangladesh. So obviously, Bangladesh has, now emerged in favor of close ties with India. Then there is connectivity in energy, right? In security, intelligence matters. We have the Padma multi-purpose bridge. We have the Akura and Agra rail link, and this will actually dramatically change connectivity with India and Bangladesh. Waterways are also being revived to reduce the cost of trade. Now, then there is obviously cooperation in other areas such as cyberspace, and then cyber connectivity between the Cox's Bazar to Agartala for faster internet connectivity in India's northeastern states is also been done. And then India has become a partner in Bangladesh nuclear program, all right, which is at Rupur. This is obviously further India is poised to, obviously India exports a lot of energy to Bangladesh, and power projects totaling 36 megawatt are being implemented in India, by Indian companies. Adverse balance of trade obviously is a bilateral issue. Now, understand the fact that despite the fact that the exports from Bangladesh to India are increasing, it's really not good enough. What is required is that we need an SEZ, and this has been notified. And when it will be operational, Indian companies will manufacture and exports to India. And Bangladesh investment, right, obviously is there in India a lot, but now India is investing a lot in Bangladesh as well. So this is reaching 3 billion, right? And to offset this economic asymmetry, India has granted Bangladesh generous line of credit and commitment to around $8 billion. And what are the problems? What are the challenges of India-Bangladesh issues? The first is the Rohingya issue. It has imposed a huge economic and security burden on Bangladesh. Then we have the issue of illegal migration. We have the NRC issue that is happening in Assam. Now, this basically will lead to a lot of problems, right? Because there's no extradition treaty. What will happen to those 10 lakh people today we are talking about? Sharing of river water is obviously an issue. Remember, the most of the rivers which are actually going into Bangladesh also pass through Bhutan, Nepal, and some of them pass through China. So actually, whenever there has to be a joint water commission for this, right? And interestingly, China also wants to be a member of those. So, and I think that's one of the questions, right, which I think you should definitely practice. Then China's security and economic footprint obviously is growing, and Bangladesh is overwhelmingly dependent on military hardware from China. And this has provided, India has provided 500 million for procurement of defense-related goods from India. But remember, India, China definitely will match India whenever it happens. Okay, just to have a look, this is just a revision of yesterday's. So the signs of a turnaround and regulatory vigil should not ease after half-yearly decline in bank cross NPAs. So what has happened is the Reserve Bank Financial Stability Report has said that the gross non-performing assets, right, to advances since 2015 has come down, and they have eased to 10.8 from 11.5 in March. So this is good news. In the last 5 months, it's doing well, right? And the stress test for credit risk at banks at models varying levels of macroeconomic performance show that the GNPA would reduce by another 0.5%, right, by March 2019. But the problem remains the state-owned banks continue to have higher levels of back loans than the private sector peers and are projected to grow slower improvements over the second half of the fiscal. Interestingly, the GNPA ratio for this category, right, is 21%, with 7% in private banks. So this is the case that majority of the PSBs have disproportionately higher share of bad loans from large borrowers, and this is 55% of the loans advanced by banks. So that tells you that there's some kind of crony capitalism that has been going on. Further, the prompt corrective framework has really done well and has lowered contagion risk to India, right? And contagion risk basically analysis assume that there will be no sovereign guarantee provided for the 11 PSBs under the PCA curbs in the event of a simultaneous failure. And projects that solvency losses due to such failure have more than halved over the 4 quarters in that ended in September. So now the contingent loss can be 34,000 crore, right? Of which was around 73,000 crore before, right? So again, this is doing well. Data on banking frauds also are a cause of concern. Close to 95% of frauds were reported in the 6 months ending September were credit related, and with the PSBs again, bear the brunt of malafide intent on the part of borrowers. Right, so this is definitely there. RBI reports has justifiably spotlighted the urgent need to tighten the oversight framework for financial conglomerates in the wake of the ILNFS meltdown, which continue to ripple across the financial systems, including at mutual funds and NBFCs. Right, and this obviously has underscored the need for greater prudence in risk taking. Right. Then now the problem is we have the Mudra Yojana, and the public sector banks have again seen a steady rise in the amount of Mudra loans turning into NPAs. And when the Mudra loan actually started by the Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana, it was expected that this would be NPA, right? It was seen to be because collateral-free, loans were given here. While the borrowers benefited, right? Because most of these, lenders find that fact they are collateral-free loans, and bankers says loans for purposes such as buying not on taxi are more secure as they come in an inbuilt collateral in terms of mudra loans, which have great potential of turning into NPAs. So that's I think a big issue, I would say, right? And another scheme which was started, the 59-minute scheme of the the MSMEs, again that will also turn into the NPAs, and that's a big problem, right? Just to have an idea, loans under the Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana have been bracketed in the 3 categories. Shishu loans are up to 50,000, Kishore loans between 50,000 to 5 lakh, and Tarun loans between 5 to 10 lakhs. So obviously this is the case, right? Then obviously the RBI has announced a one-off restructuring scheme for stress loan accounts of MSMEs, one of the key demands of the government, right? And this has happened, and unveiling the scheme on Tuesday, the RBI basically said that it is including non-fund based facilities of banks and non-bank entities to small borrowers should not exceed rupees 25 crores, right? So that is the idea behind this. Okay, so you can go through this article as well. But I think the most interesting and the most important news was this: India has cut import tax on crude and refined palm oil from South Asian countries after a request from suppliers, and this has happened. And reduction would lead to higher imports of palm oil by the world's biggest edible oil buyer in the coming months, and it would narrow the difference between the tropical vegetable oil and the competitors such as the soya oil and the sunflower oil. What has happened is the duty on crude palm oil has been lowered to 40 from 44%, while a tax on the refined variety was cut from 54 to 50%. Right, and this has been done because obviously we have a Asian free trade agreement. Right now we are importing primarily from Indonesia and Malaysia, and soya oil from Argentina and Brazil. We also buy small volumes of sunflower oil from Ukraine and canola oil from Canada, right? So just to have an idea, I think this is a good thing for your knowledge, right? So this is the case. And Indonesia and Malaysia, right, the top 2 palm oil producers were seeking a reduction in the import tax by New Delhi, as inventories were rising in both countries due to higher output. So obviously this will jump this year, right? A lot of people are saying this is the death knell for the domestic, refining industry, and will halt expansion of palm oil plantations in the country, right? And this is maybe very bad for Indianization, but obviously I think trade is always good, so this will work. Further, repayments from Iran oil are exempted from taxes, so this is there. This also will help us. There's no withholding tax as well, so this will be very good for us. Then just to have a look, patents, right? India and residents were only, awarded less patents than other countries. So this is something that we need to really look into. Use this data in your various science and tech analysis questions or in essays, right? So that, you look at it, the share of patents of other countries like Japan, US, and China are 63% between 2013 and 17. So this is a huge problem that we need to remedy. That India is nowhere. India is at 19%. So this needs to be taken care of, right? Japan is number one, China number three, Korea, South Korea, so the small countries, obviously doing well, and India is not doing well at well, right? And it also tells you that there is also a regional disparity, and Karnataka, Maharashtra have more patents. Delhi has patents, but other states are not really filing enough patents. So this is something there. USA and Israel have exited UNESCO, claiming bias. Right, the United States and Israel officially quit the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Agency at the stroke of midnight. The culmination of process triggered more than a year ago amid the Organization for Fostering Anti-Israel Bias. Right, so obviously, it has criticized Israel's occupation of East Jerusalem, naming ancient Jewish sites as Palestinian heritage sites and granting full membership to Palestine in 2011. So this is something that can come in objective type questions. Further, NASA New Horizons spacecraft has survived humanity's most distant exploration of another world. And what it has done is it has actually zoomed past a small celestial object known as Ultima Thule. Right, and this is 3.5 years after a spectacular brush with Pluto. So I think New Horizon is a topic that definitely you should cover in case you haven't covered till now. Right, these are the two questions. One question is on the challenges of India-Bangladesh ties and where they face in the future. Obviously, we talked about the NRC, right, the water dispute, and obviously, the various other issues that we talked about. Then the question is, what is balance sheet syndrome with Indian characteristics? Discuss the causes of NPA issue in India and why is it PSUs have higher NPAs than private sector banks. Okay, so right, thank you so much for listening to us today. You can join a Telegram group. You can post your answers there. We will definitely correct them and get back to you. Right. Thank you so much.